Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast. We just finished up talking about sort of the roundup about the NFL franchise tag deadline. Now we are going to be moving on to one particular case, and that is of Baker Mayfield. Now, while the Buccaneers weren't actively involved they actually were actively involved in the franchise tagging because they tagged Antoine Winfield earlier in the cycle, but that also left questions about Mike Evans, who of course has been with the Buccaneers, has been the star receiver for them for the past decade, coming off of a second-team All-Pro selection last year. Despite being 30 years old, he put in one of his best seasons of his career with Baker Mayfield. Now, Evans, 2 years, $52 million. That is a great price for somebody entering his age 31 season, and that is obviously a very convincing pitch to stay in Tampa Bay. But earlier this offseason, he also talked about the fact that he was going to consider whether or not he was going to stay, also based off of how they handled the quarterback position, whether or not they were going to keep Baker Mayfield in town. And he ends up making this decision, signing with the Buccaneers, despite having some question marks still around what they are planning on doing. As far as Evans in this specific deal, again, $26 million per year is pretty hard to turn down at this point if you're him. He has already won a Super Bowl with the Buccaneers, and if they're paying him, I love personally when we get to see the franchise players stick around for a longer time. I mentioned this specifically yesterday, but quarterbacks is one thing where there's obviously so much emphasis on that position. Teams will do anything to keep their guy. They will knowingly overpay the quarterback. But to have a receiver, especially the caliber of Mike Evans, stick around for as long as he has, I think that it's just a really cool thing that we get to watch unfold. And it's a lot more rare, obviously, nowadays. And I thought that it was just a little bit of a special feel-good thing. Buck for life. He posted on Instagram, fire the cannons. He posted the Wolf of Wall Street, I'm not leaving clip. So pretty cool stuff, but this, of course, does lead into the question marks around what is going to happen here with Baker Mayfield. It does seem like they are trying to keep him on board. They brought back Mike Evans, and after Dave Canales, the offensive coordinator for the Bucs last season, was hired by the Panthers for their head coaching job, they brought in Liam Cohen, who was previously with the LA Rams in the 2022 season, where Baker ended up there for a period of time after being cut by the Panthers. Baker was in a tough spot in his career at that point. Things really soured with the Browns. I still feel like he was done a little bit dirty there for the level of franchise that the Browns had been for decades. To have him play through the shoulder injury that they did, and then when his play dropped, they fully blamed him. I think he gave his everything there. Now, I'm not saying he's a tier 1 quarterback, but I do think he is very solid. He ends up in Carolina, which, as we all know, has been very much a mess over the past few seasons, and he ended up with the Rams for a little bit there. He only played in 5 games, but he led that legendary drive on primetime football at one point. I believe it was Thursday night. Forget who they played, but he drove all the way down the field, had that little moment, showed everybody he is still capable of doing big things, and he was reportedly very well liked by the roster as a whole. He developed a good relationship with Cohen at the time, and Cohen then moved on from the Rams last season. He went to college football. He was the offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach of Kentucky. And I think that this was a move for him to just get some more hands-on experience, I feel like, because when you're in LA under Sean McVay is just a very hands-on guy and great to learn from. I'm sure Cohen probably speaks very highly of getting the opportunity to work with McVay. But as far as him personally developing himself more as a coach, he goes to Kentucky this past year and ends up back in the NFL a year later with a new head coaching or new offensive coordinator job, where he should have a little bit more leeway and flexibility to run the offense the way that he wants to. And after he accepted the Tampa Bay job, he spoke about how easy of a decision it was and talked about the opportunity to work with Baker Mayfield again. They developed that nice relationship through their time with the Rams, and he was really glowing about Baker as a whole, about the type of player, quarterback, and leader that he is, and somebody that he wants to surround himself with players such as Baker Mayfield. He talked about a time where Baker was jawing a little bit in practice with Jalen Ramsey, and this was at a time the Rams had a really brutal season. Matt Stafford missed most of the year with an injury. The Rams ended up winning just 5 games, but Baker came in and he said that there was a spark that was sort of lit with that Rams team at the time that wasn't there all season. Baker obviously comes into Tampa last year and posts a handful of different career highs. And I think that, now we're at this point here. It was career highs in passing yards, touchdowns, and completion percentage. So he had himself a big year and set himself up in position for getting a payday. Now, when you look at the overall market for quarterbacks that is out there currently, we talked about this yesterday with the Russell Wilson situation, where there aren't tons of options for free agent quarterbacks. You have the Vikings, Falcons, and Raiders, who all definitely need starters. And then there's that next tier of they could potentially go out to get a veteran guy. That includes the Patriots, the Steelers, the Titans, the Giants, the Saints. I think that a lot of those are unrealistic, though. The Steelers have already, a couple times there have been reports coming out, as much as they've been linked to some of these other guys, that they are not looking to bring in a veteran quarterback. The Giants just paid Daniel Jones last offseason. I know he spent a lot of the year hurt, but it would be, I think, difficult for them, giving Jones all this money, to then go out and pay the price that is likely going to be Baker Mayfield in free agency. The Saints as well, same situation with Derek Carr. So I think that the most likely situation is him ending up back in Tampa Bay, which I think would be beneficial. They go out, they make the playoffs, and they even win a playoff game. I know that a lot of that game was probably due to the fact that the Eagles were a mess down the stretch of the year, but I also think that the Buccaneers really found something in themselves, and they can still be a very solid roster. They also have cap space this offseason. Now, of course, a large part of that would have to go to Baker, and the price is looking at least upwards of $30 million, which I know to a lot of people you're thinking that that is expensive, and it is expensive, but I think if they could find a way to get a deal done that was somewhat like Geno Smith, or, as much as people don't like the player itself, Daniel Jones, where it's a lot of these big money deals, but it's a lot more front-loaded in terms of guarantees, where it's fully guaranteed the first year, maybe the second year, but you can get yourself an out after season 2. That's the case for Daniel Jones. I think that he's only fully guaranteed after this upcoming season, and then the Giants have a way out. The Seahawks could have saved themselves, was in the $15 million range, somewhere around there, if they had decided they wanted to move on from Geno Smith. They had a deadline. It was either last Friday or the Friday before. But as much as there are these eye-popping numbers for quarterbacks that you might not think are franchise guys, you give them the money, you keep your team competitive, because a lot of the time it's, well, sure, you'd like an upgrade at the position, but what is the path to get that upgrade? It's not always that easy to figure it out. And Baker made an incredible impression with the Buccaneers as well. As much as sometimes the stories can be a little bit cheesy, but he's taking his linemen out to, I think they went bowling at one point. He takes them out to dinner, stuff like that. Like, he earned the respect of that locker room. He earned the respect of Mike Evans, who of course is a staple of that offense. And they ended up playing, I wouldn't say they played tremendous down the stretch of the year, because they even got blown out by the Saints late in the season. But I do think that they're still in a position in a pretty weak overall NFC South division that they could very easily find themselves in position to host a playoff game again. And I don't think that they are in that position if they move on from Baker Mayfield. And again, they have the money and they have a lot of talent on that roster as a whole in order to do so. Like I mentioned, some of these other teams that are sort of in the hunt, like you look at a team like the Patriots, where they have loads of cap space to potentially be able to make a move. But if you go in and you sign Baker Mayfield, you still don't have an offensive lines. You still don't really have receivers for the most part. You have to invest into all of those positions as well. I just think that they have a lot of holes, whereas Baker, he can stay in Tampa Bay. Now, it is worth noting that he was on record saying he is not willing to take a hometown discount. He is looking to get paid. Honestly, who can blame him, really, considering the way that his career has sort of played out over the course of the past couple seasons? Go out, get paid. I think that they were really building something there in Tampa Bay, and no, they're not necessarily, top tier Super Bowl contenders. And I don't know if Baker Mayfield is good enough to win you get you to a Super Bowl, period. And that is the counter argument for, well, why are you going to give a guy that much money if he's not going to be a Super Bowl caliber quarterback? I also think that there is just some sense of value in being a good competitive team. Like, I think that the full-blown rebuild is often a philosophy that's a little bit overstated. And mind you, I myself am a Patriots fan that was, hate to admit it, but I was rooting for them to lose games last season because of the fact that they were so far from contention that I wanted them to be in position come this draft where they could draft one of the top tier quarterbacks. The Bucs are in a spot where, again, they've won a playoff game last year. Baker Mayfield has now won multiple playoff games during his career, and I don't think that you look at a team like the Lions last year, and Jared Goff, I don't mean to, understate how impressive he's been over the course of the past couple seasons, because he's been a very good player. He's been a very good, I know that the term gets a whole lot of, stigma and drama around it, but he's a game manager, and he does so really well. It's when you limit those mistakes and just let the game play out, you find your best weapons, you take advantage of moments, and that's what Jared Goff did in the path to the NFC Championship game. I think Baker can be on that caliber of player as well. So I don't think that $30 million is too much for him. You are a Buccaneers team that, what's the point of going from winning a playoff game this year to purposefully sort of tanking your stock to try and get up towards the top of the draft next year? The draft is such a crapshoot a lot of the time. It's very hit or miss, and so are these top-tier quarterbacks that are coming out of it. I know that Baker, we all sort of have turned the page on him being an elite quarterback, but he was drafted number 1 overall just a handful of years ago in 2018. I think that he can still be a very viable option for the Buccaneers headed into next season. So that is all we have time for on this subject. We will obviously be continuing to monitor his market as the weeks go on. But we are going to be taking our second break, and when we come back, we will be moving to the NBA, where we had the favorites from both conferences drop big-time games. So stick with us, and we will be right back.